Breaking news today. Another scandal akin to Epstein's has erupted, setting the media's outrage machine into overdrive. It appears to target Republicans predominantly while seemingly giving left-leaning figures a free pass. Why does accountability seem to be applied so selectively?
Hello, and welcome to That News Show, where we discuss the latest facts, fakes, and hypocrisy as reported by the legacy media. Let's roll the tape.
MSNBC is reporting a major story involving Epstein that has implications for Trump, sparking a breakdown on Fox. This raises a question. Why does media outrage predominantly target Republicans in scandals involving the elite, while Democrats and their globalist allies often receive less scrutiny? Consider the pattern. When the Biden-Harris administration faced serious inquiries about Epstein, the coverage quickly dissipated. Now with Trump in office, there appears to be a renewed focus on justice. But we must ask, is this truly about justice? Or is it an attempt by the establishment to protect their interests and divert attention from deeper corruption within our institutions? Hold on to your hats.
So remember, if you're keeping track of what has been a sordid political story, a lot of the people who claim to care about this story for justice, to go after bad guys like Epstein and his conspirator Maxwell, are now aligned with a government that's doing the opposite, shielding people, giving more secrecy to Maxwell and of course, the deceased Epstein, because while he's gone, the information could still come out and matter to people.
The pattern is all too familiar. The government promises justice and transparency, yet when it comes to holding powerful figures accountable, we witness the usual double standards and secretive deals. The Epstein-Maxwell saga exemplifies how the political elite, regardless of party, protect their own, while the justice system goes out of its way to shield the reputations of the wealthy and connected. It's no coincidence that Ghislaine Maxwell, convicted for her role in Epstein's crimes, was moved to a minimum security prison camp in Texas, a place with less security and more comforts than most prisoners could imagine for such serious offenses. Victims and their families have every right to decry this as preferential treatment, given that Bureau of Prisons guidelines would typically mandate a higher security setting for someone like Maxwell. Yet the administration has responded by increasing secrecy, with the Department of Justice requesting the unsealing of grand jury transcripts, only to then dismiss them as containing nothing new. This is a classic Washington move. Release information selectively, redact what's inconvenient, and hope public interest wanes. The media's selective outrage also plays a role. Outlets like MSNBC suddenly champion victim advocacy and government accountability, but seemingly only when it serves to criticize the current Republican administration. This selective scrutiny was noticeably absent when Democrats and global elites were implicated, or when previous administrations made questionable deals with Epstein and his circle. The glaring double standard is a major reason why Americans across the political spectrum are losing faith in these institutions. The true scandal lies not only in the crimes of Epstein and Maxwell, but in how the system consistently shields the powerful. Victims' voices are marginalized, their demands for justice overlooked, while the elite face minimal consequences. Both Democratic and Republican establishments repeatedly show that they will forsake transparency and accountability to protect their own. This persistent pattern fuels American skepticism towards any promised investigations or reforms. They've seen too often how the system is manipulated and how narratives shift when inconvenient questions are asked. Rather than getting sidetracked by partisan conflicts, we need a genuine confrontation with the extent of this corruption. The focus must stay on uncovering every involved party and connection, regardless of their political or social standing. Anything short of this complete approach is merely more spectacle from a system that has lost the trust of the people it serves.
Why, of anyone in the entire prison system, in their view, should this convicted sex trafficker who worked with Epstein get leniency right now, get a nicer prison environment, which, by the way, if you're a prisoner, that's one of the biggest major changes in your life you can get other than getting sprung out, is getting to a better, sometimes safer prison. She got to a minimum security facility that, under DOJ rules, people convicted of her crimes shouldn't even be allowed to be in, which makes it very suspicious. Now, Republican senators, who famously go along with just about everything Trump does, including things that they had previously opposed, say this whole Maxwell thing has gone far enough. They are publicly urging Trump not to pardon her. To even have that conversation is a type of indictment. Think about the ethics of pardoning a convicted sex trafficker if there's no new evidence or substantive reason. Trump is not ruling it out, which is why they are warning in public.
Transferring convicted sex trafficker Maxwell to a minimum security facility, despite Bureau of Prisons policy that clearly states such offenders are ineligible for this level of leniency, highlights a troubling deference to the well-connected. This move from a low-security prison to a camp with dormitory housing and minimal restrictions represents a significant change in daily prison life, a privilege not extended to ordinary inmates convicted of similar violent crimes. The justified outrage among inmates at the Texas facility stems from their understanding that human trafficking is a violent crime. They view Maxwell's transfer as a disregard for every victim and a principle of equal justice. The presence of Maxwell, a notorious sex trafficker, in a space with inmates convicted of nonviolent white-collar crimes underscores the abnormality of this decision. The Bureau of Prisons' vague justifications of safety and security only add to suspicions of political influence and secretive deals. This incident exemplifies the double standards eroding public trust in our justice system. Maxwell's transfer shortly after her interviews with the Deputy Attorney General, who was previously a personal attorney for the president, deepens concerns of impropriety. Victims' families and advocates are rightly infuriated, perceiving this as preferential treatment and a clear indication that the powerful are subject to a different standard of justice. On the policy front, this case underscores the urgent need for reform in handling high-profile cases. Both political parties have overlooked the corruption within the system. Democrats have ignored Epstein's connections to their donors and allies, while Republicans have maintained the status quo, voicing concerns only when politically convenient. Despite the previous administration's poor transparency and accountability record, the current administration's efforts to adopt a tougher stance are compromised by such decisions. Every time the system favors the elite, it sends a message that justice can be swayed by the right connections. This issue goes beyond a single prisoner or scandal. It questions whether Americans can trust that the rules are applied equally to all. If Congress is committed to restoring trust, it must close these loopholes and prevent political or legal maneuvers from mitigating sentences for severe crimes. Until then, the public will continue to view the justice system as biased, and the globalist elite will persist in their impunity.
Well, she's been upgraded.
It's so astonishing. And I mean, I feel like so many astonishing things happen in this rolling catastrophe of an administration that we lose track of it.
Buzzin BC's coverage of the Maxwell transfer heavily emphasizes sensationalism, often overlooking the deeper institutional failures that contributed to this situation. Their reporting consistently portrays every development as a crisis for the current administration, while their fact-checking seldom addresses the origins of the scandal or the bipartisan negligence that enabled Epstein and Maxwell's activities for years. BC selects what to emphasize, focusing on polling and victim outrage, but ignoring the inconvenient truth that the justice system and media class have shielded these predators across multiple administrations, particularly during the Obama-Biden years when oversight was minimal and connections to global elites were ignored. The network's lack of objectivity is evident as their broadcasts, filled with emotionally charged interviews and victim letters, primarily implicate Republicans, especially President Trump, downplaying the involvement of establishment Democrats and their donors. This imbalance is stark, considering the Bureau of Prisons' guidelines for high-profile sex offenders were disregarded by both parties, yet only the current administration faces intense scrutiny. MSNBC often features critics of the administration and voices calling for a political coup within the Republican Party, but seldom invites legal experts who might suggest that this failure is not solely a Republican issue. Their visual storytelling, with close-ups of victim statements and dramatic graphics about exploding scandals, tends to manipulate more than inform. Rather than providing a clear timeline of how Epstein's network was protected by globalist interests and bipartisan insiders, the coverage devolves into a partisan blame game, conveniently omitting the years of inaction by previous administrations and the international connections that are crucial to understanding the case. One of MSNBC's strengths is their willingness to air victim perspectives, often overlooked by other outlets. This is compromised by the reluctance to critically examine Democrat-aligned figures or question why the Department of Justice under previous leadership did not aggressively pursue these cases. The network's reliance on polling data that shows public distrust is revealing, yet it does not tackle the root cause. Americans have observed the ruling class avoiding accountability for decades, and selective media outrage only exacerbates that cynicism. If MSNBC were genuinely committed to transparency and justice, they would demand answers from all involved parties, not just the current administration. They would examine the Department of Justice's assertion that grand jury transcripts expose nothing new, rather than accepting it without question. They would challenge the validity of Maxwell's appeal on technicalities in light of the substantial evidence against her. And they would expose the international networks, financial, political, and media that supported Epstein and Maxwell instead of using this tragedy to target one political faction. Until the media confronts the globalist structures and bipartisan complicity at the core of this scandal, the American public will continue to see through these theatrical displays. The real story is not merely about one administration's errors, but about a system that protects the powerful, regardless of which party is in power.
His best. I mean, on the one hand, he says he wants this story to go away. He wants people to stop talking about it. But he obviously doesn't want that enough not to make, or for his administration not to make these moves that, at least on the surface, look extraordinarily incriminating.
Yeah, these are huge risks. These are very guilty-looking risks, to your point. And in politics, looking guilty is bad. In law, we have a different standard. And as you were careful to note, the fact that somebody's referenced or caught up in a scene is not at all probative of the higher criminal standard.
On the economic front, the real question is how high-profile legal maneuvers in the administration's handling of the Epstein-Maxwell fallout ripple through the broader system. When the justice system appears to protect the well-connected, it sends a message to ordinary Americans and small business owners that the rules are different for the elite. This perception erodes confidence not just in government, but in the fundamental fairness of the marketplace. A breakdown in trust at the top often leads to less investment, hiring, and entrepreneurial risk-taking, particularly among Main Street businesses already burdened by inflation, regulatory overreach, and the effects of globalist trade policies that have weakened American manufacturing. For working families, these headlines are more than just political theater. They reinforce the belief that the system is rigged, allowing those with the right connections to avoid harsh penalties, even for serious crimes like trafficking. This issue goes beyond any single case or administration. It reflects a long-standing system that favors the powerful, often at the expense of the middle class. Previous administrations have failed to address these double standards, with many establishment figures remaining silent or complicit when their own donors and allies were involved. From the financial sector's perspective, uncertainty and scandal at the highest levels of government can unsettle markets, increase borrowing costs, and hinder economic recovery. Institutional investors, wary of instability or the threat of sudden regulatory crackdowns, may pull back, impacting pension funds, retirement accounts, and the broader stock market. Additionally, the cost of legal settlements, investigations, and compliance often trickles down to consumers through higher fees, reduced access to credit, and slower wage growth. Households already struggling with persistent inflation, particularly in essentials like energy, food, and housing, find it even harder when government credibility is compromised by scandals. This undermines the implementation of pro-growth, deregulatory policies that could benefit working Americans, shifting the focus instead to damage control and political infighting, which leaves families bearing the brunt of economic stagnation. In the manufacturing and energy sectors, the uncertainty created by ongoing investigations and the threat of politically motivated prosecutions discourages long-term investment. Companies hesitate to expand or hire, fearing that today's headlines could translate into tomorrow's regulatory headaches. This is exacerbated by a media that, eager for ratings, often amplifies every rumor and accusation without proper context, while downplaying similar or worse behavior from their favored political figures. The selective outrage from mainstream media, particularly regarding scandals that implicate globalist interests or establishment Democrats, drives public cynicism. Americans notice the double standard, intense coverage when Republicans are involved, but muted or absent when Democrats or their donors are implicated. This pattern erodes trust in the media and is reflected in polling that shows a widespread collapse in trust. Rather than merely focusing on the spectacle, the real economic story concerns how these elite-driven scandals reinforce a two-tiered system, one that rewards connections and punishes independence. It is crucial to demand transparency and equal accountability, not just to avoid political theater, but because the health of our economy and the financial security of American families depend on it. Until both parties are held to the same standards, and the globalist class is no longer protected by their media allies, these crises will continue to undermine the prosperity and freedom that ordinary Americans strive so hard to achieve. Well, there you have it. The pattern is clear. Whenever a story threatens the power of the ruling class, the media shifts the spotlight, consistently favoring Republicans and ignoring their own. They propagate the narrative that corruption is exclusive to one party, deserving all the scrutiny, while the real power players, often Democrats and globalists, remain unscathed. The previous administration, led by Biden and Harris, mastered the art of distraction and protection. Under President Trump's leadership, we see a refusal to participate in these games, a commitment to stand up for ordinary Americans, and a demand for genuine accountability. Consider this: if justice isn't universal, can it truly be called justice? The system is rigged, and without addressing this hypocrisy, nothing will change. Leave a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. That's all for now.